Hi, welcome to the shop. This week we're putting a light in the Indiana Jones display, and I want to match that background. I really love that background, so I came up with this. It's a light and it's got lights, well, it's a light fixture and lights are embedded in it. The only problem is it only worked for about a day. I blew it out. So this is going to be a story of my success and my failure. When I began, I just needed a light in my display, and so I figured just a strip light would be just fine. Then I got this idea of creating a wireframe and then putting putty over it to make it look like a root. The idea that I'm working on is that I'm going to have a large single root coming down, and then I'll have 3 lights shining toward the back wall to kind of show the back wall. And then 1 spotlight, and this is the spotlight, will go straight down. As I started putting this together, I wanted to see how the spotlight would look, and so I just connected it over my my little golden idol here, and boy, it looked great. Now this is just with 1 light, and it just looked fantastic, and it gave me that kind of spotlight, that ethereal "where's this come from" spotlight, and so that's what I'm trying to enhance. I want to use 3 lights in total for the spotlight. So cutting out a little base from the prototype board here is going to allow me a surface to mount those on and then fit it inside the tube that's going to become the spotlight. The lens I'm using on the end of the tube is the exact same size as the tube, so I needed something to mount the lens in. So a little bit of sprue, cut thin, rolled, and then glued to the end of this is going to give me something to mount that lens into nice and securely. After gluing in the 3 LEDs, I just painted the background of it silver to try to give a little bit more reflection down the light tube that I'm creating to make the spotlight. During the build, I didn't get good enough footage to use of me putting all the putty on the entire wireframe. So this is after the fact, and it's actually dried a little bit, maybe half a day, so it's still a little pliable, but I'm mounting all the lights in it right now. With all the lights in, now I'm just going to go ahead and work on this wiring. I want to get it all tucked in there and set in nicely. And then I'll use hot melt glue to seal the whole thing off. Now in retrospect, this was an issue. I shouldn't have done that. It was the glue that made it impossible to go back and repair. For the base coat, I just use black acrylic paint. This will really help later on when I want to bring out details. Once the paint was dry, I went in and added another root. The small protrusions you saw were just toothpicks that I drilled into the side of this thing so that it had something to really grab onto. This shows really clearly that I didn't really sculpt anything. I just got everything in its general position where I wanted it, and then went at it with the brush, and then the brush brought in all the texture. For finer detail, I just use a dental pick. This is one of the favorite things about this air dry clay. When you tear something away, it leaves almost like little fibers behind that looks very natural. So I tend to use this more than some of the epoxy putties and stuff like that are pretty common for diorama and model builders. So if you're looking for an alternate to those, try the air dry clay. This is my first light test with the entire assembly. everything works just the way I wanted. The spotlight's coming down on the golden idol, and then the 3 lights are shining on the back wall to illuminate it. At this point, I'm just totally psyched. Everything's working. It's just as I imagined it. But soon, stuff doesn't work out. And this is the reason. I got 3 LEDs in the spotlight. I got 3 LEDs on the back wall, and it's all being powered by this little power supply. But for the moment, everything's working great, so I just charge forward. To do my detail painting, I'm going to use the black, and I don't want to cover this with the brown. I just want to get the highlights, so it's kind of like a heavy dry brush. It's not a dry brush, it's got a heck of a lot of paint on it, but you'll see what I mean as we progress here. Next, I'm adding a much lighter color, and this is supposed to be where the root has lost the bark. Initially, I'm just kind of finding areas that are going to be conducive to make it look like bark has been falling away, and this is just like the bare root. So I'm kind of going in the low spots of the texture. Now I'm coming back a little bit more careful and really defining those edges. I'll finish it up with a little dry brushing, and then it's on to some jungle vines. Now I've seen another variation of this, but I think this is a little simpler. The only real rule here is stay clear of the glue that's already in the water. As it cools, and it cools pretty quickly, it won't stick together, but if you cross over when it's in the water, then it just makes a mess, and then you got maybe shorter pieces. I'm only going to show half of this because the other half is just spray painting. So what I've done is I've taken the dried vines and I spray paint them, leave the paint wet, and then put it in the sanded grout and kind of mush it all around and try to get it to stick. Not a lot sticks. So I do this process like 4 times on each side. So it's just back and forth, paint, and put more stuff on. And eventually enough sticks to give it a nice texture on the outside. Once I'm done, these need to dry for a number of hours. I need that paint to dry underneath the sanded grout. Once it's dry, I'll go back and seal the surface with my Mod Podge and water solution. Now this is Mod Podge with water, 50-50 cut, and then I'm just dabbing this on. Once this dries, then I'll flip it over and do the other side, and this really kind of seals that in. Now here in this close shot, you can kind of see the texture that these vines are taking on. I'll add leaves to these later, and it'll look really cool. Here's the fixture hung upside down as it'll be in the display. And now I'm just adding some moss, and then I'll add some leaves. One of the cool things about vines is the fact that they're hot glue, so I just heated up the end and stuck it to the light fixture. Leaves are also pretty simple for me. What I've done here is I've just taken some heavy cardstock paper, painted one side a lighter tone of green, the other side a darker tone of green, and then I'm using a simple paper punch you can find anywhere at a craft store, and I'm punching out leaves. Here are those leaves, and to make them look a little more natural, I take a Tamiya tool and just kind of put a seam right down the middle. By doing this on my finger, it kind of folds the leaf a little bit, not too much, and gives it a really cool looking texture. A little white glue attaches it to the vine. The last thing I did was paint the inside of the 3 LEDs that are going to shine on the back of the display, the back wall. I just painted their cavities with a little silver. This is just some acrylic silver. And I think it definitely helped. At this point, everything's pretty well done, and it's time to mount it into the case. So here are some of the final shots of it in the case and working, and it's just glorious. I'm loving this thing. I think it's the coolest thing ever. And I just love how the spotlights come down on the golden idol. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. Over the next 2 days, the light just kept getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer until it finally just stopped working. Okay, so this is almost like a prologue because I am going to put that back in, just for now. It's not working, but I'm going to show you what I did. And it's nothing mind-blowing. As a matter of fact, it was like a 10 or 15 minute job to do what I ended up doing, which is just, I put a strip light in it. It's disappointing. It's not discouraging, but it's disappointing that this thing didn't work. I mean, I love it. It's totally neat. It's well beyond what I wanted, but it doesn't work. But I do think I know how to make it work, and so that's why it's not discouraging. I rarely get discouraged. I do get disappointed, but if I got discouraged doing the kind of stuff I do, well, I would never start a new project. I love experimenting. I love trying, new things. And I think if I'm not doing that, I'm really not enjoying what I do. But this thing was just, it just came out so much cooler than I thought, and then it doesn't work. So anyway, what I ended up doing is putting just a regular strip light in here, and I'm going to show you that real quick. And it's so simple. I mean, it's honestly what I thought about doing when I started this whole project. Just put a strip light in there, and then I thought, it would be cool to match the back, and of course that's where this came from. So anyway, looking in the case, it's just simply a strip light. There's like nothing to it. It's just a strip light. I put power to it. I made this little enclosure box where I could have a plug. It was very simple. Fits on the back of this, kind of does a little slip-in thing. But it works fine. Now, it's not giving me like all the cool shadows that I want. It's not directing the light specifically where I want. But it does wash the entire cabinet. And frankly, it looks really nice. But it's just illuminating it. And this, when I imagined and built it, it was really meant to do some very specific things. It was meant, to put this spotlight over the idol, which it did, illuminate it separately from everything else, showing that this is like a special thing. So it did that. It has these 3 lights here that in its orientation, it's mounted in the ceiling like this, and actually these touch, so it looks like this is coming off that, so that's kind of cool. But anyway, those 3 lights they're angled to kind of do this. And in the pictures, it does that nicely. But what I think happened was, when I put everything in here, number one, all the LEDs, they're somewhere right around here, they're all together. And if for whatever reason, my little power supply that went out, which, that gives off 5.5 volts on 2 leads, and that's what I've got here, 2 leads. So I had 5.5 volts going to each of these leads. And what I discovered after it started failing, I went back and looked, is that the power supply was giving off 10 volts per lead, which is just way too much for the diodes that I've got in here. So the power supply, for some reason, didn't hold its 5.5 volts. And because I had too much power going to those resistors, then they would overheat and then they would fail, which made the lights fail. So yeah, it's just really disappointing, but I believe I know how to make it work next time I build another one. And this still looks really cool, and it's not going to look out of place in there, so I'm going to put it back in, and I'm going to leave it there. But I do believe I'm going to go back at some point and repair it, or make another one even. It was super fun. I do think it came out really neat looking, and that's what I wanted. So it's not a failure. Well, yeah, it is a failure, but to me it's not a failure. It was a learning experience, and all of this stuff is, because it's all, a lot of it is experimental. I don't plan stuff, maybe, and that's a problem, but I like not planning because it allows me to kind of solve problems all along the way. And for me, you know, solving problems is why I'm in here. Solving problems when I build stuff is huge. That is probably why I do everything I do in here. I don't build from plans, not other people's plans or my own. I just start into a build and figure it out along the way. Might frustrate a lot of people. And I've been asked multiple times, do you have plans for stuff that you build in? I'm sorry, I don't. I just don't, because I don't work from plans. But for me, it keeps it very fluid. It keeps it very exciting. I don't know from day to day what problems I'm going to encounter and how I'm going to solve them. So this is just one of those things. I think I know how to solve it now. This was 2 or 3 days of work, but in the long run, what I got out of it was I know how to build something like this from scratch, and I'm pretty darn sure I can do it later, and it's just another problem to be solved.